My husband divorced me for his 22-year-old secretary, so I married his billionaire dad and inherited everything. If you're just tuning in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. And please show us some love with a like. And comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as she stared at the security footage on her laptop screen. There, in crystal clear definition, was her husband Larry ravaging his 22-year-old secretary Sandra across his executive desk, the same desk where their wedding photo once proudly sat. The timestamp showed yesterday, 3:47 p.m., while she had been at their daughter's parent-teacher conference, explaining why Daddy couldn't make it again. Emily Brooks's hands trembled as she replayed the footage. 7 years. 7 years she'd devoted to raising his children from his first marriage, building his confidence when his business nearly collapsed, standing by him through every struggle. The bitter taste of betrayal filled her mouth as she watched Larry whisper sweet promises to Sandra, the same words he'd once whispered to her. The worst part wasn't the infidelity itself. It was the audio. "Soon, baby," Larry groaned. "Once I get rid of Emily, we can have everything. The house, the business, everything she helped me build." Sandra's giggle echoed through the speakers like shattered glass. "What about your kids?" she purred. "They'll understand eventually. Besides, Emily practically raised them anyway. They won't miss much." The security system Larry had installed to protect their family had become the instrument of his downfall. As CEO of a tech startup, he'd never imagined his own wife would discover his backup files. But Emily had always been smarter than he gave her credit for. The Harvard MBA he'd mocked as unnecessary was about to become his worst nightmare. Tomorrow was their anniversary dinner. Larry had no idea that his carefully planned betrayal was about to explode in the most spectacular way possible. Emily spent the night meticulously planning. Her fingers danced across her laptop keyboard as she accessed accounts, gathered evidence, and prepared for war. The security footage was just the beginning. She'd found encrypted messages, financial records showing money funneled to Sandra's apartment, and most damning of all, legal documents Larry had already prepared for their divorce. He'd been planning this for months, consulting lawyers while she planned their anniversary celebration. The prenup she'd naively signed 7 years ago would leave her with almost nothing, while Larry kept the business she'd helped build from the ground up. Her marketing expertise had tripled their revenue, her connections had secured their biggest contracts, but legally she was entitled to mere scraps. Dawn crept through their bedroom windows as Larry stirred beside her, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, the same voice that had promised Sandra forever just hours earlier. Emily's stomach churned, but she managed to smile. "Happy anniversary, honey." The irony wasn't lost on her. Today marked 7 years of marriage and the beginning of his carefully orchestrated betrayal. As Larry showered, humming contentedly, Emily made 3 crucial phone calls. First, to her lawyer sister Barbara, who'd been suspicious of Larry from day one. Second, to a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. Third, to someone Larry would never expect, his own father, billionaire real estate mogul William Brooks. "William," she said softly into the phone, "we need to talk. It's about Larry, and I think you need to know what your son has become." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. William had always treated her like the daughter he'd never had, but Larry had driven a wedge between them years ago. The anniversary dinner at Lou Bernardine was supposed to be Larry's grand finale, the last romantic gesture before he destroyed their marriage. He'd chosen the restaurant where he'd proposed, probably thinking the irony was poetic. Emily arrived in the red dress he'd bought her last Christmas, looking every inch the devoted wife he was about to discard. "You look stunning," Larry said, his eyes already distant. Throughout dinner he kept checking his phone, no doubt coordinating with Sandra. Every smile felt like acid on Emily's face, but she played her part perfectly. When he excused himself to take a business call, she knew he was really calling his mistress. "Emily," Larry began when he returned, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "We need to talk about our future." Here it comes, she thought, watching him fidget with his wedding ring, the same nervous habit he'd had since college. "I've been thinking about our marriage and I feel like we've grown apart. Maybe it's time we consider other options." The restaurant buzzed around them, oblivious to the nuclear bomb about to detonate at table 12. Other options? Emily repeated, tilting her head with practiced innocence. Like what, Larry? She watched him struggle, clearly having expected tears or pleading, not calm curiosity. I think we should separate, he finally managed. It's not working anymore, Emily. We both know it. The lie came so easily she almost admired his audacity. I've already spoken to lawyers about making this as painless as possible. Translation: I've already figured out how to screw you over legally. Emily nodded slowly, then reached into her purse. You're absolutely right, Larry. We should definitely discuss our future. She placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Starting with this. Larry's face drained of color as Emily slid the contents of the envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. Surveillance photos, bank statements, and printed emails spread between their untouched dessert plates like damning confessions. The centerpiece was a screenshot from the security footage. Larry and Sandra in their most compromising moment, timestamp clearly visible. What the hell is this? Larry whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. His eyes darted around the restaurant, paranoid that other diners might see his shame displayed so publicly. Where did you get these? Your own security system, Emily replied, her voice steady as granite. The same one you installed to protect our family. Turns out it protected me from you instead. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a scream. 7 years, Larry. 7 years I raised your children while you plotted my destruction. The waiter approached to refill their wine glasses, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Larry waved him away frantically, his hands shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass. Ice water spread across the photos, but the evidence remained clear as day. Emily, I can explain. Explain what? How you've been funneling our money into Sandra's apartment. How you've already filed preliminary divorce papers. How you promised her everything I helped you build. Each question landed like a physical blow. Larry loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. The private investigator was very thorough, Emily continued, producing another envelope. Corporate accounts, personal communications, even recordings of your conversations with your lawyer about how to minimize my settlement. She smiled then, and Larry had never seen anything more terrifying. You wanted to make this painless, darling. Well, congratulations. This is going to hurt me a lot less than it hurts you. There's something else you should know, Emily said, savoring the moment like fine wine. Larry sat frozen, his world crumbling around him while other diners chatted obliviously at neighboring tables. I called your father today. The blood drained from Larry's face so quickly she worried he might faint right there in the restaurant. You what? His voice barely qualified as a whisper. William Brooks and his son had been estranged for 3 years, ever since Larry had refused to involve his father in the business expansion. Pride and stubbornness had cost Larry millions in potential investment, but more importantly, it had cost him his father's respect. We had a lovely conversation, Emily continued, watching Larry's hands tremble as he reached for his wine glass. Turns out he's been wondering why his favorite daughter-in-law hasn't called in months. He was quite concerned when I explained how busy you've been mentoring young employees. The irony was delicious. Larry had spent years keeping her away from his father, claiming William was too controlling and didn't understand their generation. In reality, Larry knew his father would see right through his selfish facade. William Brooks had built an empire through integrity and hard work, values his son had apparently forgotten. He wants to meet with me tomorrow, Emily announced, pulling out her phone to show Larry the text confirming their lunch appointment. He's very interested in hearing about your recent business practices, especially the creative accounting you've been doing to hide assets from your wife. Larry lunged forward, desperation making him reckless. Emily, please. Don't involve him. We can work this out between us. I'll give you whatever you want. But they both knew it was too late. The moment she dialed William's number, Larry's carefully constructed world had begun its inevitable collapse. What I want, Emily said, standing gracefully, is justice. William Brooks's penthouse office commanded a view of the entire city, but Emily found herself more impressed by the man than his surroundings. At 72, Larry's father retained the sharp intelligence and quiet authority that had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his handshake firm, and his eyes, Larry's eyes burned with controlled fury. "I've reviewed everything you sent me," William said, gesturing to a leather folder thick with evidence. "My son has become everything I raised him not to be." The disappointment in his voice was more devastating than anger would have been. A cheater, a liar, and apparently, a fool who documents his own crimes. Emily settled into the chair across from his massive desk, feeling smaller and more vulnerable than she had since discovering Larry's betrayal. "I didn't want to involve you in our personal problems, but when I found out about the financial fraud—" "You did exactly right," William interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Larry isn't just betraying you, Emily. He's stealing from the business, manipulating accounts, and setting up his mistress as a silent partner. This isn't just adultery, it's embezzlement." The words hung heavy in the air between them. "I've been watching his business practices for months," William continued, opening another file. "Declining performance, questionable deals, money disappearing into offshore accounts. I thought he was just incompetent. I never imagined he was this corrupt." He looked up at her with something approaching paternal affection. "You built that company as much as he did, didn't you?" The question broke something loose in Emily's chest. Years of minimized contributions, dismissed ideas, and stolen credit came flooding back. "More than he did," she admitted quietly. "Every major contract, every marketing breakthrough, every strategic partnership. That was me. But legally I own nothing." William's smile was sharp as a blade. "We'll see about that. I have a proposition for you," William said, his fingers steepled as he studied Emily across his desk. "But first I need to know, do you want revenge or do you want justice?" The question caught her off guard, forcing her to examine motivations she'd been trying to ignore since discovering Larry's betrayal. "What's the difference?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Revenge is temporary satisfaction. Justice is permanent consequences." William opened his desk drawer and withdrew a thick legal document. "I've been planning to restructure my holdings for estate purposes. Originally, Larry was set to inherit controlling interest in my companies. Obviously, that's no longer appropriate." Emily's heart began to race as she grasped the implications. William Brooks's empire included real estate developments, tech investments, and the very building that housed Larry's company. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that perhaps it's time for new leadership in the family business," William replied. "Someone with integrity, intelligence, and the business acumen to actually deserve what they inherit." He slid the document across to her. "Someone who's already proven they can build something from nothing even when they don't get credit for it." The papers outlined a complex restructuring that would make Emily a primary beneficiary of William's estate, contingent on certain conditions being met. This is too much," she whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. "No," William said firmly. "This is exactly what my son's actions have cost him. He chose a 22-year-old over the woman who made him successful. He chose immediate gratification over long-term stability. He chose to betray the best thing that ever happened to him." His voice softened. "I won't make the same mistake. The question is, are you willing to take what you've earned?" The proposition William outlined was breathtaking in its audacity and precision. "There's one condition," he said, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. "For the inheritance restructuring to be legally bulletproof, particularly given Larry's challenges that are sure to come, it would be beneficial if you were more permanently connected to the Brooks family." Emily's breath caught. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting a marriage of convenience," William replied calmly. "Purely business, naturally. You'd retain your independence, your identity, everything important to you. But legally, you'd become a Brooks heir with unassailable rights to the empire Larry threw away." He paused, watching her expression carefully. "Think of it as the ultimate irony. He loses his wife to his father." The idea was insane, brilliant, and perfectly fitting. Larry, who had always been jealous of his father's attention toward Emily, would watch her become everything he'd lost. "The media would have a field day," she said, though she was already considering the practical implications. "Let them," William shrugged. "I've weathered worse storms. Besides, this isn't about public opinion. It's about justice. Larry stole from you, lied to you, and planned to leave you with nothing. This ensures he gets exactly what he deserves. Nothing." Emily thought about Larry's children, her stepchildren, whom she'd raised with more dedication than their biological father had ever shown. What about the kids? They've already lost one mother, and now their father is abandoning them for his secretary. I can't hurt them further. William's expression softened. The children will be provided for through a separate trust, one Larry can't touch. In fact, with you as their step-grandmother, they'll have more stability than they've ever known. He leaned forward. You're not breaking up a family, Emily. You're saving what's left of it after Larry destroyed it himself. The decision crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. When do we do this? The courthouse wedding was deliberately small. Just William, Emily, her sister Barbara as witness, and a justice of the peace who specialized in expedited ceremonies. Emily wore a simple blue dress, nothing that could be construed as bridal, while William looked distinguished in his tailored navy suit. The ceremony took exactly 7 minutes, legally binding them in what was surely the most unconventional marriage in the city's history. You may kiss the bride, the justice announced, clearly uncomfortable with the age difference he couldn't quite understand. William leaned over and kissed Emily's cheek with grandfatherly affection, both of them fighting smiles at the absurdity of the situation. Mrs. Brooks, William said formally, then winked. Welcome to the family. Again. The paperwork was filed immediately, making their union official before Larry could mount any legal challenges. Within hours, Emily's name was on bank accounts, property deeds, and corporate documents worth more than she'd ever imagined. Her sister Barbara, initially shocked by the plan, had become its most enthusiastic supporter once she understood the legal ramifications. Larry is going to lose his mind, Barbara laughed as they left the courthouse. His wife marrying his billionaire father? This is better than any soap opera. But the real masterstroke was still to come. William had arranged for the marriage certificate to be delivered to Larry's office by special courier, timed to arrive during his afternoon meeting with potential investors. The same investors William had personally called to warn about Larry's questionable business practices and recent personal instability. As they drove away from the courthouse in William's Bentley, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete control over her own destiny. Larry had tried to manipulate the game, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. His father had invented the rules. Ready for phase 2? William asked, noting her determined expression. More than ready, Emily replied. Let's finish this. Larry's howl of rage could be heard 3 floors down from his corner office. The courier had delivered the marriage certificate during his presentation to Brooks Industries' board of directors, the very board his father chaired and the same investors he'd been desperately courting for months. The irony was as devastating as it was deliberate. This is impossible, Larry screamed into his phone, calling Emily for the 15th time in 20 minutes. You can't marry my father. This is insane. It's some kind of fraud. But Emily's phone remained resolutely silent, his calls going straight to voicemail she had no intention of returning. Sandra stood in his office doorway, her usual confidence replaced by wide-eyed panic. At 22, she'd imagined herself as the conquering queen, stealing a successful businessman from his boring older wife. She hadn't bargained on that boring wife becoming a billionaire's heir overnight. Larry, maybe we should talk about this, she began nervously. Talk about what? Larry snapped, his face red with fury and humiliation. My wife just married my father and inherited everything I was supposed to get. There's nothing to talk about. He hurled his phone against the wall, watching it shatter like his carefully laid plans. The investors had filed out in uncomfortable silence, clearly spooked by the family drama and Larry's unstable reaction. His secretary, his original secretary, not Sandra, had fielded 6 calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Sir, she said cautiously, there are photographers outside the building. News traveled fast in their circles, and a scorned wife marrying her ex-husband's billionaire father was exactly the kind of scandal that sold papers and crashed stock prices. Larry's company would be worthless by morning, his reputation destroyed, his father's empire forever beyond his reach. And somewhere across town, Emily Brooks, her new name felt powerful on her tongue, was having dinner with her new husband, planning their next move. The reading of William Brooks's revised will took place exactly 1 month after the wedding, in the oak-paneled conference room of his law firm. Larry sat across from Emily and his father, flanked by lawyers who looked as uncomfortable as he felt. The past month had been brutal. His business had collapsed, investors had fled, and Sandra had moved out the moment she realized Larry was now penniless. "To my son Larry," the lawyer read in a monotone voice, "who has shown himself to be unworthy of the Brooks name through his adultery, fraud, and betrayal of family values, I leave the sum of $1 and this message. You had everything and threw it away for temporary pleasure. Learn from this." Larry's face went from red to purple to a sickly gray. $1. His birthright, his inheritance, his future, reduced to a single dollar bill and a lecture from beyond the grave. Though William sat very much alive across the table, the will served as his final judgment on his son's character. "To my beloved wife Emily Brooks," the reading continued, "who has shown more loyalty to this family than my own blood, I leave controlling interest in Brooks Industries, the Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and all associated assets, with full confidence that she will use them wisely and justly." The numbers were staggering. Real estate holdings worth hundreds of millions, business interests spanning multiple industries, investments that generated more income in a year than most people saw in a lifetime. Emily had gone from a betrayed wife with nothing to one of the wealthiest women in the country in the span of 30 days. "There is one additional provision," the lawyer added, consulting a separate document. "Mrs. Brooks has established a trust fund for Larry's children, ensuring their education and well-being regardless of their father's circumstances." Even in her triumph, Emily's first thought had been protecting the innocent victims of Larry's selfishness. Larry stood abruptly, his chair crashing backward. "This is insane. You can't just give away my inheritance to my ex-wife." William's voice was ice. "I can give my assets to anyone I choose. You made your choice, Larry. Live with the consequences." 6 months later, Emily stood in the penthouse that was now legally hers, looking out over a city where her word carried the weight of billions. The transformation had been complete and devastating. Larry's tech company had folded entirely, its assets absorbed by competitors who showed no mercy for his failures. He'd been forced to move into a studio apartment, surviving on the charity of friends who were quickly disappearing as his usefulness evaporated. Sandra had married a hedge fund manager 3 months after abandoning Larry, proving that her affections had always been purely financial. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd climbed from secretary to trophy wife, just not with the man she'd expected. Larry had been reduced to a cautionary tale, whispered about in boardrooms and country clubs as an example of how quickly fortune could turn. "Any regrets?" William asked, joining her at the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 73, he seemed energized by the upheaval, as if orchestrating Larry's downfall had given him new purpose. Their marriage remained a business arrangement, but a surprisingly comfortable one built on mutual respect and shared objectives. "Only that it took me so long to see who he really was," Emily replied honestly. 7 years I wasted believing his lies, building his dreams while sacrificing my own." She turned to face her husband, still strange to think of him that way, with a smile that had regained its genuine warmth. "But I learned something important. Never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose." The doorbell chimed and their housekeeper announced that Larry was downstairs, begging to see his father. It was his 3rd attempt this month, each more desperate than the last. William had refused every request, maintaining that some bridges once burned could never be rebuilt. "Should I tell him you're not available?" William asked, though they both knew the answer. "Tell him exactly what he told me," Emily said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came with absolute power. "Tell him it's over and some things can never be forgiven." 1 year after the divorce that had destroyed Larry Brooks's life, Emily stood before the mirror in her walk-in closet, preparing for the annual Brooks Industries Gala. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the broken wife who discovered her husband's betrayal in grainy security footage. This woman commanded respect, wielded influence, and had learned to use both with surgical precision. Under her leadership, Brooks Industries had expanded into new markets and broken profit records that had stood for decades. The business community had initially questioned William's decision to elevate his daughter-in-law over his son, but Emily's results spoke louder than any skepticism. She'd proven that Larry's greatest mistake wasn't just betraying her trust, it was underestimating her capabilities. The gala guest list read like a who's who of power and influence, but one name was notably absent. Larry had attempted to secure an invitation through various intermediaries, each request politely but firmly declined. He'd become a ghost in his former social circles, a reminder of how quickly success could turn to scandal when built on lies and betrayal. "Ready, Mrs. Brooks?" William asked, offering his arm with the same gallant charm that had once swept 3 wives off their feet, though none of those marriages had been quite as practical or successful as this one. As they descended the grand staircase into the ballroom filled with New York's elite, Emily felt the weight of curious glances and whispered conversations. Let them stare, she thought. Let them wonder how a discarded wife had become the most powerful woman in the room. The answer was simple. She'd stopped accepting less than she deserved and started taking exactly what she'd earned. Somewhere across town, Larry sat in his cramped apartment, probably watching the news coverage of the gala he'd once hosted as heir apparent. The greatest revenge, Emily had learned, wasn't causing someone pain. It was living so well that their absence became completely irrelevant. She'd won everything, and the victory tasted exactly as sweet as justice should. Thanks for listening. Give us a like if you like the video and share with us in the comments what you think about this lovely tale. We always enjoy reading your comments.